Just kidding. I'm actually not speaking, which is why if you're adjusting your volume, now you can hear me. Funny joke, I know. Okay, so we are in chapter 4 today, evolution and biodiversity. So take a look at our objectives for 4.1, 4.2. What is biodiversity? Why is it important? And where do species come from? Okay. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. So what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the variety of Earth's species, number 1, okay? Bio meaning life, variety meaning many of them. So we have lots of different species diversity. But it's not just the things that are living that are important when we talk about the Earth's biodiversity. It's also the genes they contain. There's also the ecosystems that the organisms live in, both the abiotic and biotic components, or the living and non-living components. The type of soil, even though it's not living, is very important to biodiversity. It's the matter that cycles through the ecosystem. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all those things are of vital importance. And of course, biodiversity is a renewable resource. So think about, for example, we're talking about plants. How can plants be a renewable resource? Well, we depend on them, correct? Right? And as long as we take care of our soil and the substrate in which the plants grow, then they'll always be there for us to harvest them. And we need the plants making their sugar and their glucose for us to survive. They're the basis of the food chain. Without them, it all ends. Okay, so why is biodiversity important? Well, we have estimated that there are somewhere between 4 and 100 million different species on the planet, which is a huge variation, right? 96 million species are up for grabs, maybe. So either, since we've discovered, let's see, about, where is that part? Oh, sorry. We've discovered or identified, here it is, 1.8 million species. Either we're almost halfway or we're very, very far away. And it's hard to tell because we still have a lot of our worlds to explore. We've only explored 5% of the oceans. There could be millions of undocumented species living there. A little side note, an example, in a study in the Amazonian rainforest, they netted 1 tree in the rainforest, put gas underneath the tent, and so it went up and knocked everything out that was alive in the tree. They collected it in the nets that they put at the base of the tree, took them back into a lab, and counted and identified 1,500 new species of insects from that 1 tree in the Amazonian rainforest, which we are tearing down at remarkable rates. So we might lose most of those before we ever find them. Invertebrates are the insects, of course. Vertebrates would be things like you and me, other primates, other mammals, things with the backbone. 300,000 plants, and we have lots of lichens, mosses, and algae. Okay, so different types of biodiversity. Species diversity, right? A number of different species. So in my classroom, I have people, I have a tarantula, I have a rat, tortoise, 2 species of fish, and a snake. So I've got a species diversity of 6 in my classroom. Genetic diversity, the different genes that make up the organism. And talking about humans, right? What genes make us different from each other? You'll see that genetic diversity is very important to variation, something we'll get to in just a little bit. And then ecosystem diversity, the different types of ecosystems that the Earth can support. Grasslands, forests, deserts. On a sad note, deserts are the fastest growing biome on the planet because of our poor farming practices. More on that later. Then we also have functional diversity, the different processes that take place, things that we really rely on. Matter cycling, an ecosystem service done for us by the planet for free that we depend on. The flow of energy through the system, coming from the sun, being captured by the plants, and then being re-released as herbivores and carnivores consume the plants in each other and release that energy. And then species interactions, meaning the interaction between a green anole and a brown anole, the interaction between an eagle eating a snake. All of these things are very important. Okay, so where do species come from? Evolution. So evolution of the cell phone here. We have this tendency here now to get bigger and bigger screens. Maybe we'll be carrying around huge phone like this big one day. So species come from biological evolution via natural selection, and that is what we're going to be looking at today. And I know a lot of people have a hard time with evolution because we think of it as trying to get rid of the idea, the notion of God and religion. But what you must hold on to and remember is that evolution is a part of science, and science is trying to explain how something happens. Religion is trying to explain why. What is our purpose? Why are we here? Those are fundamentally two separate notions, so we'll just keep them separate and, not let them intermingle. So, remember, it's evolution, not evolution. Sorry. It is a process that results in heritable change over time. Heritable meaning things that are passed on through generations. So it has to be something that can be inherited, okay? Meaning that because I've worked out extensively, these bad boy biceps right here cannot be passed on to my son just because I have them, okay? He will have to work himself in the gym to acquire these triceps, pecs, delts, etc. So let's talk quickly about Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Okay, so both men independently came up with the idea of natural selection. Charles Darwin was already at this point a well-respected scientist, and Alfred Russel Wallace was just getting started. So years prior, Charles Darwin had gone on the HMS Beagle on a 5-year voyage. In doing so, he collected lots of different species, and he put together the theory of evolution. He noticed these animals seem to be changing and adapting quite regularly to their environment. So how are they able to change and adapt over time? So he had to come up with something to propose something to explain that, and that was natural selection. Now he published that on the origin of species by means of natural selection in 1859, and he came up with this idea called fitness, which we're going to get to later on, just meaning reproductive success. So Charles Darwin took this stuff and he wrote that book, and when he was done with it, he put it in his desk drawer for about 20 years and never touched it. And he did that because he knew that what he was suggesting would not sit well with a lot of people, and they would be scared that he was trying to say that God didn't exist, which is what he was not trying to say that. But he knew that is how it would be interpreted. So he didn't do anything with that book. Meanwhile, this guy, Alfred Russel Wallace, a budding naturalist, comes up with the same idea, and knowing that Darwin was well respected, they were oceans away from each other, he wrote a letter to Darwin and summarized his theory of natural selection and sent it to Darwin. Said, here, do me a favor, take a look at it and let me know what you think. So Darwin did, realize that it was basically the same idea, consulted with some of his friends, and they said, you know what, you need to publish your findings or else you won't ever get credit for this discovery that you made. So the next scientific symposium, Charles Darwin went and discussed his on the origin of species. But to give Darwin some credit, he included Alfred Russel Wallace and discussed that he also came up with this same idea. The reason why I really don't remember Wallace that much is because in the later years of his life, he ended up trying to propose the idea that human life was planted here by aliens from another life. It was kind of laughed out of the scientific community. But that is how both men came up with the theory of evolution via natural selection. So how does evolution work? Okay. So first off, notice this thing right here. See how it's changing? I'm quite proud of that picture I stole from the internet, right? Showing all the natural variation. Look at the variation in the corn, huh? Think about the variation of all the children and, young adults in any classroom that you've ever sat in on. And it's important to remember that populations, not individuals, evolve by becoming genetically different. If one organism in a species gets some type of advantageous adaptation, but then dies before he ever has children, well, then that adaptation is lost. No evolution has taken place. That adaptation has to become dominant in that population before evolution can take place. So first off, it relies on genetic variation. There has to be a variety, and that variety has to already be existing in the gene pool before nature starts selecting for that adaptation or that variety. So the first step in the biological evolution, and it occurs through mutations. So that is where we're going next. How do mutations occur? Several ways. One, your DNA is exposed to mutagens, radioactivity, or chemicals. Now, these things are around us all the time. Radiation is what generates geothermal heat in the ground. When you fly, when you're about roughly 10 miles high, at the very top of the troposphere, you're picking up radiation that's in the upper parts of our atmosphere, just always exposed to it. Chemicals that we now make all the time everything that we put in our bodies and surround our bodies with are carcinogens. Mistakes in replication, your cells are constantly dividing and going through this replication process. And eventually, they start to make mistakes the older you get. And, unfortunately, that messes up your DNA. What's important, though, to remember is that mutations, the majority of them are bad. They do lead to death, cancers. It's not good. But every once in a while, some mutations actually add genetic information into your genome. And it's only mutations of gametes that are passed to offspring. So just like I was discussing how my ripped six-pack won't be just passed on to my son because I've worked so hard for it, those things would not be, your six-pack is not in your gametes. And those of you who don't know what gametes are your sex cells, okay? So it has to be a mutation that ends up in your sex cells that then get passed on. For example, if I like to go outside all the time and never put on sunscreen, I will develop skin cancer. That's a mutation of a gene in my skin. That will not be passed on to my child if I were to have a child after I develop skin cancer. It has to be in your gametes or your sex cells. So now natural selection can occur. Once we have these adaptations caused by mutations, the environment can now select. So individuals in a population have traits that will either enhance survival and the ability to pass on those traits, or they won't. So the advantageous traits have to give an advantage over, right here, selection pressures. So what are selection pressures? Say it here. There we go. Selection pressures are environmental pressures that eliminate organisms or allow them to survive. Okay? So, let's see. Good. Pressure from a predator on its prey. So if there is a mutation that allows you to be slightly more camouflaged than the others in your species, then you're going to survive while you're being camouflaged, while the others get eaten by the predator. Changes in food. Think about a hummingbird. Okay, they eat a very small selection of food. If that food source is gone, then they'll probably go extinct. Humans eat a huge variety. So if one type of food we eat goes extinct, we'll probably be okay. Let's see. And pressures from changes in climate. As the climate changes over time, some organisms are going to be adapted to that environment, some are not. So these are different types of selection pressures. What's very confusing sometimes is that we have this tendency to think that the organism itself is making a conscious decision or effort to change, to adapt. And that's not at all happening. There is no conscious decision. There are mutations which cause adaptations, and if those adaptations allow you to live longer and pass on your genes, then those changes go into the species and evolution takes place. So if you have this adaptation, it has to lead to differential reproduction. So those with an advantaged trait will leave more offspring. If your advantage doesn't allow you to live longer or survive certain kinds of death, and thus be able to mate more and pass on more of your genes, then evolution won't take place. Because remember, it has to occur within a population, not just one individual for evolution to take place. So you have to have more offspring than the others around you. And not every offspring is going to survive, so we have to have a lot of them to go through and move through a species again before this population starts to change. So a quick little example, the peppered moth in England. So the way this hypothesis was put together was, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the bark on the trees in Europe was this lighter color. And there's two different moths here. There's a dark moth that you can see quite easily here, and one that is blending in or camouflaging into the bark. Industrial Revolution takes place. They start burning coal in London, and it collects on the bark of the trees. And as the bark of the trees starts to darken, the darker moths start to blend in, and the lighter moths start to stand out. So there's a small change that we're seeing in this population. This would force the population of moths to become darker over time. Why? Because these are not being predated upon because they camouflage in. These are easily seen and consumed by the predator. So it's driving the population to be darker because these are the only ones that are able to have lasting offspring who can then reproduce themselves. Okay, so when faced with these selection pressures, these are the three choices a species has. One, you adapt, which you cannot control via natural selection. You can migrate to a new area, or you die. Okay, so survival of the fittest. We have a tendency to think that fit equals strong. If that was the case, I would be screwed. But if that's not the case, you just have to be able to pass on your genes. So fit means more able to pass on your genes than other organisms. In some instances in the wild, it does mean strong because you fight for different mates. All right. Luckily for us humans, sometimes there's fighting for mates. Sometimes you can just schmooze them with a nice smile and a good joke. Men, think about that. Okay, so now what is an adaptation? A heritable trait that allows an organism to fit into its environment in order to live and produce offspring. So we break these up into two types. One is behavioral, changes in how an organism behaves, obviously. The important thing to know about behavioral adaptations is that they're very quick. Think about how you behave with your friends versus the moment you walk into their house and you meet their parents, right? All of a sudden you're a little more formal. Hi, Mrs. Casey. Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you. I will definitely tell my mother you said hello, absolutely. Contrast that with structural adaptations, which take a long time to develop because they have to move through a population. Through a population, they have to happen because of mutations. It takes a long time. So let's look at zebras. Why do zebras have stripes? There are two theories that are actually proposed, and it's the conjunction of two of those, or both of those types of adaptations. Their stripes make them one large, crazy mosh of black and white to a lion who is hungry. He or she, sorry, because the females do most of the hunting, yay, male lions, they look out and they see all these zebras, and they can't tell where one zebra starts and the other ends. So their eyes are going crazy, all right? And since they hunt by picking off the slow, the weak, the one that straggled from the herd, as long as the zebras stay together like this, they're pretty safe. So there's two things going on. One, structural adaptation, the stripes. Two, behavioral adaptation, the zebras knowing to stick together, all right? And then in recent studies, a little side note, it's also been shown that a lot of insects and mosquitoes don't like striped patterns. So zebras have less insect bites than other organisms that do not have those stripes. Pretty interesting. All right, this brings us to niche. A niche is an organism's way of life or its role in the environment. An adaptation allows it to fit into the niche. So the niche is its job. Okay? The adaptation is the credentials it needs to do that job. So there are broad and narrow niches. Okay? Some people say niche. I don't really like it. I say niche, but whatever makes you happy. So a specialist, the advantage to a specialist is that you're not competing with anyone else for that food, right? That's your food. You're the only one of the few things that consume it, so you reduce competition. The adverse effect of it is that if that food source goes extinct, then you go extinct too. So they're more prone to extinction. Generalists, it's a lot more competition for the food, but because you can eat such a huge variety, chances of you going extinct are far less. Okay, so limits to adaptation. The trait must already be in the gene pool. This is something I discussed a little earlier. When something needs to adapt, needs to evolve, needs to change, they can't just think up, man, I wish I had this trait that I could select from right now. I wish I could evolve right now. No, these mutations have to take place and happen before the environment selects for them. Okay? They have to be present in the gene pool already. Even if a trait is in the population, it is limited by rate reproduction. So what's going to evolve faster, a rabbit or an elephant? Rabbits can have up to 40 babies a year. An elephant can only have one baby every 2.5 years. The gestation period for a human is 9 months, right? Gestation period for an elephant is 22 months. That's crazy. So it takes a long time for us to see such changes in elephants. And most of the population without the trait must die off before it becomes dominant. So the others with the trait, until they're all gone, are still reproducing as well, hopefully at lesser rates. And then once they're gone, then those genes can become dominant. So fossil record supports evolution. So fossils are the mineralized remains of bones that we find, and the fossil record represents only 1% of all the life that's ever existed on the planet. And some people find this, say, well then wouldn't fossils kind of be evidence against evolution? And I say no, and the reason for that is, think about bones. Bones are biodegradable material, right? If the bones for everything that's ever existed on the planet were still here, the Earth would be nothing but a pile of bones. So the fact that we ever do get fossils is the phenomenon. That's the amazing part, because the bones are made to just break down and disappear. So the fact that we ever even find any is pretty amazing. Let me see. I need to stop saying I know, I'm sorry. Apologize. You guys should just count how many times I say it and keep a little ticker at the bottom of your page, and then you can submit it to me so I feel embarrassed. Genetic makeup of populations can change. So yes, populations, again, evolve, not individuals, and they become genetically different than their ancestors. Common myths of evolution, again, survival of the fittest does not mean strong, just more able to pass on your genes. 2, organisms develop traits because they want or need them. Does not happen that way. You cannot think up a change that you want in your genetics and just make it happen. Natural selection is a grand plan for nature to become more perfect. That is not the case. Natural selection just selects whatever is best suited to that current environment. And when that environment changes, what was surviving yesterday may not be what survives tomorrow. All right? I hope you enjoyed 4.1 and 4.2. This is Mark Pooler, and I'm signing off.